which is map out the steps that would need to take place in order for you to accomplish your goal. So here I picked out my goal number 1, which was to launch this survey for the Supporting Student Success Project, the 3rd phase, and manage the data collection. And you can see in this single goal, I've identified 7 different steps. And this is where it becomes so important when we think about managing what can we really do in that time frame. I could have listed 13 goals in the first step. But once you look at each goal and what are the multiple steps that is required to realize that goal, having a manageable number of goals becomes, you can see the importance of it, right? So take a moment to pick what would be your number 1 goal that you listed and start to deconstruct that goal into the multiple steps that it will take to realize it. What specifically do you need to do? You might say, I need to read these 7 articles. Well, what 7 articles? Right? So take a moment to break down the multiple steps that it takes to realize that single goal. I find this is often the step where people really struggle, because this is what take from the big goal and breaking it down. But if we can force ourselves to see that any goal is really just comprised of a number of steps, it makes it a more attainable thing, because then you can say, well, today or for this week, all I need to do is make headway on X, step 1. So I'm going to ask a question. Love to hear some people's. How many goals from step 1 did people have written down? Just in general, for the term. 2. How many people had 2 goals? 3 goals? 4 goals, 5 goals, 6 or more goals. So then look at step 2, when you pick just a single goal and started to list out and deconstruct that into multiple steps. For your single goal that you just wrote about, how many steps did you break it into?
5.
5 steps. How many else had 5 steps for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 or more? Okay. So this is, I illustrate this in that if you have 5, 6, 7, 8 steps for any single one goal, it becomes really evident why having 10 goals can be very difficult to accomplish. Because 10 goals broken up into 5 steps per are 50 different steps that you need to accomplish in the academic term. Oh, that's crazy. You will never sleep, right? So what's manageable? So sometimes this becomes a really important piece to give yourself then the time and space to say, and from this point forward, is this realistic? Now that I've started to deconstruct those goals into their composite steps, is this realistic? And where do I want to begin? What's most important? What's the priority for this term? What can be pushed to another term? Summer, next fall. What's really important right now? Just going to take a moment to see, are there any questions?
I just kind of wondered, the way you listed this out, for example, could this be like a checklist?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And some people use mind mapping software, you know, like where they have like, here's my goal, and it's comprised of multiple steps and flow charts and bubbles and arrows. I mean, there's loads of different ways to visualize this. Some people really like to have big, like, you know, big butcher blocks of paper, and they just draw all over them. Whatever is useful for you to see it visually, to get it out on paper so that it's not just swimming around in your head, but that it has a concrete place to live, right? This is the same reason why sometimes you'll hear sleep psychologists will say, if you're having a really hard time sleeping because you have so much rolling around in your head, just get up, write it down. That way your brain knows it's committed somewhere. You can review it in the morning, and then it gives yourself the license to just be free to sleep. So this is that same concept. Was this difficult? If so, in what way was it difficult? Did you find it challenging?
I would say just like listing out all the steps, like thinking about it in detail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Listing out the steps, because as a graduate student, I don't know how to do some of the things,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm learning,
Mm-hmm.
and so I don't know what steps are involved.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what takes the time. I think there's a huge learning curve, at least on my part, a
Mm-hmm.
huge learning curve to some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
And so I've got these goals down here, but I don't know what I'm going to be facing in terms of the steps involved in achieving them.
Right. And so I think that suggests the real necessity of having a network and a community. Because if you don't know what the steps are, there are people who you can ask and say, this is my goal, or this is the step that I think, but I don't know what is required within this. Can you help me so that I can plan my time, so that I can think about how much time this might take and allot it accordingly? You don't have to do it all alone. And I would argue you really can't. This really, I would say that academic life is a collaborative process where it requires many people sharing and supporting one another. Did anyone find this to be an easy task? It's okay. Please say, yeah, I thought this was pretty simple, straightforward. Yeah, Victoria, what was easy about it?
I think it was easy because I already have the goals in my mind. I just haven't really committed to them. So I was just putting it down on paper and moving to it.
Which can be scary in and of itself, right? People who do goals and coaching will say it's important to tell someone of your goal, to write it down, because without that commitment, it can always just keep floating around in your head, right? So a friend of mine who decided to run her first 5K, which was a huge, huge undertaking for her, told everyone, put it on Facebook, uploaded the map of what that 5K course was going to look like, because she wanted people to know that was her goal and to check in on her. to hold her accountable, and also to encourage. Huge amounts in terms of having some encouragement. So now that we have the steps, the next thing is really about, so how are we going to get it done? What's the timeline? What does this look like? So now take your steps and move them into your calendar. And I'm just going to give you some time. I've shown you a little taste of what mine looks like. This is your chance to be planful and reflect the stuff we never have time to do, so make the most. How is this process, introducing the different steps into your calendar? We were talking about the challenge of figuring out how long it will take to do different things. What was this like for people?
Rather difficult, because normally if it is a new process, you can't give the right estimated time for each step.
But you've thought about where it would slot into a general time frame. But there is some flex, because you don't always know just how long that might take. Yeah. What was it like for others? Yeah, Linda.
I found I left a step out when I was posing it. So then I had to go back and say, oh no, I got to fit that step in there.
I find that this is a lot like completing a research ethics application, in that it requires you to literally think through step by step all of the contingencies. And in the same way that I find ethics applications always strengthen my research, because it forces me to think through step by step how this is going to happen, this is very similar. Because otherwise it's this sort of big amorphous goal that I feel like I can't fully realize, but then thinking through the composite steps helps to actualize it for me. Others. So I want to share with you, so now that you have sort of the general frame of your term, let me walk you through what my full plan looks like. Because you will find that you have multiple goals. Some of you identified 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you have 3 or 4 or 5 goals, you may find that you have 5 columns in an Excel spreadsheet. And you have weeks that run down all of the rows. And then committing to the calendar around 5 goals is for each cell plugging that in. What does the first step in goal 1 look like in what week? And what about goal 2 and its first step? And what about goal 3 and its first step? And before you know, you can have a really full Excel spreadsheet. So Envision, oh, there's no, maybe I'll just do this. Envision that this is goal 1, goal 2, goal 3, goal 4. And this is January, week 1, and January, week 2, and so on. So you've just specified all these various goals, and so maybe you have step 1 here, and maybe step 1 here, and step 1 here. Can you see how very busy your calendar could look? This is why having a manageable number of goals, once you specify all the steps, become very important, right? Because maybe now you have in January, week 2, step 2 on the first goal, and steps 1 on goals 2 and 3. And you do that for many, many months, and it gets a little bit daunting. So manageable numbers of goals within the steps will help make your life, I think, a lot more doable. Otherwise, I feel like multitasking, we're always just spinning the plates and not moving forward. So how do you do this, and how do you keep it all straight, you might be asking? Well, I'll just share a little bit about my own experience and what I do. So I have done this. I have it all, I have this mapped out into my calendar, and I do use an Excel spreadsheet. And the columns really are the different projects that I have. And the rows really are the different weeks of the entire year. And the steps are built into the cells. And then I sit down with myself every Sunday, and I have the Sunday meeting. And I look at what my calendar has in that full plan, and I say, okay, what have I said that I was going to accomplish this week? And now how am I going to build it into my actual weekly calendar? And I sit down with my phone, which is where my weekly calendar lies, and I say, all right, I have these steps that I've committed to for this project. Where am I going to block that and book it in my actual weekly calendar time? And so for me, it's not just my research projects, but it's around teaching, preparing for teaching, service, student committee work, all of that sort of thing. And so I have a full Excel spreadsheet that includes them all, and I have the Sunday meeting. What can I accomplish this week? Where does it fit into my calendar? And there are some weeks where I have more that I hope to accomplish than I have time in my week. And then that just has to be bumped for the next week. So it's important to realize that this is the beginning of a dialogue with yourself. It's the beginning of a plan. But like any good plan, it is not set in stone because there are unanticipated things that come up. There are opportunities for conversations that you just couldn't have forecast would exist. And you don't want to miss out on those. So where are you going to have some flex? That's important too. And not only is it important for you to check in with yourself, it's important for you to figure out who you need to have on your team also checking in with you. So thinking through what's the support that you need in order to be successful. So if you need other people to be working with you, like there are people who really write and work better when they have someone there with them. So they'll go to a coffee shop and say, let's work for 2 hours, or let's work for the first hour, take 10 minutes to check in and chit chat, and then get back to work. But I'm going to work because I know someone else that I like is working too. We feel better together. So do a write on site, whether that be a coffee shop or where have you. I'm part of an online writing group. We check in with each other once an hour. We use Google Hangout. You post your goal for the beginning of the hour, and then 55 minutes in, the little bell goes bing, and then people check in with one another. How'd that go for the goal? Did you accomplish in this last hour what you set out to accomplish? Check in with each other. Do you need to have accountability? Someone checking in, asking how you're doing. Sometimes people work better under a deadline, and that deadline could be having a friend for coffee or for a glass of wine say, so I know you were working on those ethics applications last week. Do tell me how they've progressed. So I meet weekly with 2 of my friends who are also alumni members of the Faculty Success Program. We sit down for coffee or for a glass of wine, and we specify, because we've shared our term plans with one another and our goals, and the steps that it will take to accomplish them. And at the end of each meeting we say, next week I want you to ask me about what? So this last week I said, I want you to ask me about reading and abstracting and free writing on some cultural analysis. I want you to ask me about that. Because I need to be held accountable for doing it. So what do you need? Some people just need to have someone go, or to nag. Check in every day. There are people who really are professional naggers. And there are all sorts of individual writing coaches out there, not only for the actual mechanics of writing and academic writing, but to help spur you on, to ask good questions, and to move you forward. And the question is what kind of support do you need? And only when you know what kind of support you need can you start to be, really mindful about cultivating that network of the support you need. So just in looking at this, how many people does this resonate with you? What kinds of components within this have you cultivated in your own academic work and writing? Anyone want to share? What have you done?
I actually really do like the idea of having an accountability person. So whether it's a friend or like someone who's sharing that experience with you, if it's another doctoral student, I think that's important. I find though, in my experience, I've tried different things. I actually prefer if it's someone I'm not really that close friends with. Absolutely. Absolutely. I have an accountability group also online. It's this, and I don't know any of them. I've never met them. And typically I've actually only seen a fairly small little online photo of them. I don't know the work that they're doing. They're in disciplines completely outside of my own. But I am invested in their success as they are in mine. So we check in with each other every night on this Google Doc. Like, how are you doing? You said your goals for today were. How did you manage? And I think what's helpful, and I'm with you, is I don't know them. So there can be some real benefit in having friends and people at a distance. And you might find at different times you need different kind of support.
So it's okay to give yourself permission to say, right now I need this, which is very different than the kind of support I needed 6 months ago. Absolutely. What else has worked for folks? Yeah.
I found it helpful to, I guess it's number one, to come into OIC and do even some of the reading or some writing, just like it feels collective framing, kind of like momentum is good, because sitting at home is different, there are a lot of distractions. The library is different as well, so I like that Jeff is a staple in the department.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something about knowing that there are others in your same boat and that you can sort of capitalize on that collective energy. For sure. For sure. So just in terms of, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think rewards are important because of because so much of what we do is kind of idiosyncratic and personal, and I find that I can organize myself without an external body working with a colleague, but I do have to kind of find ways of rewarding myself for accomplishing something.
Absolutely.
So whether it's, and usually it's publication, which is the sort of final thing. So at one point I had to deal with somebody where the notion was we actually had it sort of worked out. If it was a peer-reviewed article, it was X, a beer or something. If it was something bigger, it was a bottle of wine. But the notion was that at the end of this, there would be a mini celebration.
Yes.
And we would do that for each other as we went along.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of thing is quite positive because it's, you know, it's you do all the stuff. You get a publication, your name is on something, and nobody really sees it. Right? It's sort of like it's a loose end or something in the end. So the notion of sharing it with colleagues, which we often do within the faculty or others, I don't do it necessarily because I want somebody to cite me. I do it because this is, for me, it's sort of a routine. This is done.
Yeah.
It's out there, and other people can take a look at it and do what they want with it. But I got to find some way of rewarding myself.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. I think it's kind of good to sort of pat yourself on the back or have someone else pat you on the back.
Yeah.
With the notion of you accomplished one of these goals, and therefore it's time to move on.
Yeah. In fact, so Carrie Ann Rockamore, who I borrowed so much of these ideas from, notes the importance of the rewards as like a celebration of the big goal, but also calls them treats. What are the small treats that you're giving yourself on a daily basis for making headway in any meaningful way on the various steps? So a treat might be like, I'm going to have a glass of wine, or I'm going to have dinner with a friend. So how are you giving yourself some, like, it's the carrot.
Incentives.
Incentive, and a daily incentive, because if we wait all the time until the final publication, it can be, I mean, I'm waiting for something that will be 2.5 years out, and that's since acceptance. Right? So I want to celebrate now, early and often. So what are the treats that you're going to give you? How will you reward yourself for making headway on a regular basis? I want to share a couple post-workshop resources. The first one is the National Center for Faculty Diversity and Development that I mentioned from the beginning. This was the home of the Faculty Success Program that I told you about. And oftentimes there is a for-pay, I use my professional development money to do the full semester or summer-long program. But Carrie Ann often runs free 2-week writing challenges. Oftentimes we sometimes don't begin the writing of some big project because we just don't know where. And her suggestion is if we just write 30 minutes a day, so they're called the 30-minute writing challenge. If we would just write 30 minutes a day, every day, maybe take the weekends off, writing then becomes just part of our habit, as opposed to this big monumental thing that we have to do. It's just what we do. So how can you begin? I'm freshest in the morning, so I need to write my 30 minutes first thing when I wake up. I'm working to get there. Some days are better than others, but it is my goal, the 30 to 60 minutes every day, some writing, and then leave the rest of the morning for the research work that might not be actual writing related. So having space for both the writing as well as all of the steps within the research work. Academic coaching and writing, this website is specifically that. It's around for dissertation writing and academic writing, a nice, good resource. So I'm going from the sort of really broad, out there, public resources to what's here locally. So then the U of T Writing Center for graduate students, this is a lot more around sort of the mechanics of academic writing, but I think there's also opportunities to develop the support networks that we were talking about, and then here at OISE, the Student Success Center. So global and then local of resources to help. Questions? Thoughts? Comments?
One strategy that I find particularly useful is to turn off the email.
Totally.
And in fact, when I travel, I'm probably quite productive because it's at a different time zone. And so I make sure I don't turn on the email till they've gone home. So.
Yeah. There are really extraordinary links that people have developed to turn off the email, which is like disengaging the actual capacity to launch an internet browser. There are some people who are so kind of tied to it that even if they can launch, they will. I think that's extreme, but yeah, just make sure your Outlook is closed so you don't get those little flash ups. Oh, somebody just emailed me. Yeah. What else has worked for folks? What other questions, comments, thoughts? Yeah.
I did a course with the English Language Writing Center. They offer courses each month in the semester, and I did the pre-writing strategies course with Jane Freeman, I think it is. It was excellent. It was, and you actually get an hour face-to-face with her to go over your writing project.
And what office is that located? I mean, how did you find that?
I get an email every semester. I'm getting every semester, every month, and each month of the semester there's different courses being offered.
Okay.
English Language Writing, I think it's ELWC.
You can access it from the OISE site.
Okay.
As well.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So,
So I think the intention is to make this available on the OISE Higher Ed Group Blackboard site. And so I invite people to add resources through Facebook as comments so that we can really populate this with the multitude of resource supports we have locally. Victoria, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just wanted to say the ELWS office is actually, I work at the School of Graduate Studies, and it's located there at 63 St. George Street. And if you go to the SGS website, which is www.sgs.utoronto.ca, you'll see a link to the ELWS website.
Excellent. Excellent. Other questions, thoughts, comments, strategies? Yeah, Christian.
I'm really a fan of the theory of evolution, in the sense that the most complicated task or article or paper you can write always start with the simplest steps. So I would sometimes go even further than what you suggested, breaking our goals into steps. And I saw at the time, the timeline was into weeks or a couple of days or so. I sometimes go further and then break down into individual days.
Yeah.
And even further into what time of the day. In the morning I have to do this.
Yeah.
In the afternoon I have to do this. Maybe in the evening I have to do this. And I found it useful when you break it down so into the simplest form, then you get to accomplish. At the end you get some kind of complex thing that you couldn't have imagined.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. And that's what I do when I have my whole academic term. Then every week on that Sunday night, that's when I look and say, okay, day by day, hour by hour, what am I going to do to realize these various steps? Yeah, I think I'm with you. Breaking it down into simple, and not only simple, but simple that you believe you can do.
Yeah.
That's so critical, because sometimes there's so much amounts of, as academics, self-doubt. Can I really accomplish this? Am I taking on, if you have not experienced the imposter syndrome, good on you. That's tremendous. But I think most academics feel some level of imposter syndrome at some point in time, all the time. And so asking yourself, can I really do this? We'll break it down into the simple steps. What can you do right now? Because those simple steps add up to the complex ones. Great point. Other questions, thoughts?
I think one of the great advantages of this kind of approach that you're talking about, which I think is, I've learned a lot from this presentation, is it also tells you when you can say no to things.
Yeah.
And that I think is something we're also not very good at.
Yes.
Some of us, in the sense of, it's when you begin to see how booked that calendar is, when you take all of those events and put them in and realize what your existing goals are, so that when someone says, could you do this additional, I don't know, review of an article for the journal, and you realize there aren't 2 hours left in that schedule anywhere,
Right.
that you can legitimately say no, it just doesn't fit.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that sometimes saying no is just as important as
Yes.
scheduling
Oh.
yourself in this respect.
Yes, saying no and taking time for yourself. I'm not always the very best person at this, but I endeavor to take the weekends off, and minimally to take a day off every week, whether that be on the weekend or during the week, but to give myself the brain time to just sort of breathe so that I can come back and have fresh ideas. So thinking about how do you take that brain time as well. Celebrations, days off, ability to say no, the comfort in saying no, having looked at your calendar and saying, I've got goals set forward and I really want to realize them. And sometimes in order to realize them, I can't do it all. And I can't be all things to all people. And that's okay. Anything, final parting thoughts? I hope this was helpful. I found this helpful for myself when I went through it. I've shared it with a number of my grad students. And I thought, since I literally just did this the other Sunday, and at our faculty meeting on January 7th, Glenn said, does anyone have something for the seminar series? And I thought, oh, I think this could be useful. So I hope this was helpful for you. Do share your ideas and resources on Blackboard, and thank you very much.
Thank you.